My dear, since I'm carrying the Whitmore heir, I think it's time you transfer the lake house into our name. Chloe said it with a soft smile, one hand resting proudly on her swollen belly as if she were offering me a gift instead of demanding my life's work. My son Ethan didn't look at me. He just nodded. The room went quiet. They expected tears, maybe even gratitude. Instead, I stood up slowly, walked to my sewing basket, and picked up a long, slender hat pin. Then I turned and began walking straight toward my pregnant daughter-in-law. If this moment made your heart race even a little, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always read your comments, and if you enjoy stories like this, quietly intense, a little painful but deeply real, consider liking and subscribing. After my husband Michael died, silence became the loudest thing in my life. For 42 years, that man had filled every corner of our home with warmth. His steady voice in the mornings, the soft hum of old jazz in the evenings, the way he would always check the locks twice before bed. When he was gone, the house didn't just feel empty. It felt unfinished, like a sentence cut off before it could make sense. We had built everything together, not just a business, but a life that meant something. Our home decor company started in a single rented storefront in Oak Brook, Illinois. Back then, we couldn't afford polished displays or high-end inventory. I remember arranging secondhand furniture under harsh fluorescent lights, while Michael charmed every customer who walked through the door. He had a way of making people feel seen, and I had a way of making things beautiful. Together, we turned that tiny shop into a chain of stores across 3 states. But more than the money, it was the discipline we built, every contract carefully reviewed, every investment measured, every risk discussed at the kitchen table long after midnight. Michael used to say, "Wealth isn't what you earn, Audrey. It's what you protect." I never forgot that. After he passed, I didn't fall apart the way people expected. I grieved quietly. I kept working. I honored everything we had built by protecting it just like we promised each other. And for a while, Ethan understood that. My son had always been gentle, not weak, just soft-hearted, the kind of boy who would apologize even when something wasn't his fault. As a child, he used to sit beside me in the store, swinging his legs, while I balanced the books, asking questions about everything. "Why do people buy things they don't need?" he once asked me. "Because they're trying to fill something they can't name," I told him. He didn't fully understand back then. I'm not sure he does now. When Ethan grew older, he chose a career in commercial real estate. It made sense. He had a good eye, and he liked working with people. We stayed close. Sunday dinners were a routine. He would stop by unannounced just to check on me, sometimes bringing takeout, sometimes just bringing himself. After Michael died, those visits meant more than I ever told him. Then he met Chloe. At first, I liked her. That's the part I wish people understood. I didn't begin this story with suspicion. I welcomed her. Chloe Whitmore walked into my life with polished grace. She knew how to speak, how to listen, how to hold eye contact just long enough to make you feel important. The first time Ethan brought her over, she arrived with a bouquet of white lilies, my favorite, though I had never told her that. "I asked Ethan what your favorite flowers were," she said sweetly, but Ethan looked surprised. That was the first tiny crack, so small I almost ignored it. Over the next few months, she became perfect. She remembered birthdays. She asked about my business with genuine curiosity. She offered to help with small things, organizing paperwork, reviewing vendor lists, even suggesting new design trends she claimed were emerging in high-end markets. At first, I appreciated it. She made Ethan happy, and after everything we had been through as a family, that mattered. But then the questions began to shift. They became more precise. "So, Audrey, do you manage all the assets yourself, or is there a trust structure in place?" It was asked casually over coffee. I smiled politely. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just curiosity," she said, waving her hand lightly. "I've always admired how you've built everything." Another time during dinner, she leaned forward slightly. "Do you ever think about legacy? I mean, what happens to everything you've built after, well, you know, after what? After I was gone?" I set my fork down slowly. "I think about many things," I replied. She smiled again, but her eyes lingered just a second too long. It wasn't what she asked. It was how often she asked, and how carefully she listened to the answers. Ethan didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. To him, Chloe was attentive, thoughtful, engaged. To me, she was studying something. At first I told myself I was being overly cautious. After all, Michael and I had spent decades training ourselves to think that way. It becomes a habit, like checking the locks at night. You don't stop just because everything seems safe. But still, I said nothing. I watched, I listened, and I waited. There were other small things too. Chloe had a way of steering conversations. If we talked about family, she would gently guide it toward the future children, grandchildren continuing the Whitmore name. If we talked about business, she would circle back to ownership structures, protections, long-term planning. And always, there was that soft tone, never demanding, never aggressive, just persistent like water slowly shaping stone. One evening, after a particularly long dinner, Ethan stayed behind while Chloe took a call outside. He leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing the back of his neck. "She really likes you, he said. I looked at him carefully. "I know. She just thinks ahead. That's all." "So do I replied. He laughed lightly, but there was tension in it. "It's different, Mom, different." That word stayed with me long after he left, because he was right. It was different. The way Chloe thought ahead wasn't about building something. It was about positioning. And I began to feel it more clearly with each passing week. Not fear, not yet, just awareness, the kind that sits quietly in your chest and refuses to leave. Looking back now, I realized something important. The signs were never loud. They didn't need to be. People like Chloe don't break doors down. They open them slowly, while you're still thanking them for knocking. And by the time you realize what's happening, they're already inside. The night Chloe announced her pregnancy, the air in my dining room felt almost sacred. I had set the table myself, as I always did on Sundays. Linen napkins folded just right, soft candlelight, the faint scent of rosemary from the roast in the oven. It was a ritual I had held on to after Michael passed away to keep something steady in a world that had quietly unraveled. Ethan arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine. "Your favorite," he said with a small smile. I noticed he looked nervous, not unhappy, not anxious, just charged, like he was holding something in. Chloe followed a few minutes later. She looked radiant, almost too radiant. Her dress flowed gently over her body, her makeup soft and glowing. But what caught my attention wasn't her beauty. It was her hands. She kept them folded low just beneath her waist as if guarding something. We sat down. Dinner began as it always did, small talk, polite conversation, the kind of gentle rhythm families rely on when they don't want to disturb deeper waters. Then halfway through the meal, Chloe set her fork down. "I have something to share," she said softly. Ethan reached for her hand immediately, and just like that, I knew. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, time stopped. Ethan let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, his face breaking open with pure, unfiltered joy. He stood up, pulling Chloe into an embrace, his hands instinctively resting against her stomach. "My God, Chloe, really?" he whispered. She nodded, pressing her face into his shoulder. "Yes." I watched them, and I truly deeply wanted to feel what they were feeling. This was what families hoped for, what Michael had once dreamed about. A grandchild, a continuation, a new beginning after so much loss. I smiled. I even stood, stepping forward to hug her. "Oh, Chloe," I said gently, that's wonderful news." And in that moment, I meant it, or at least I wanted to, but something inside me didn't move the way it should have. There was no warmth spreading through my chest, no soft, overwhelming emotion, just stillness. A quiet, watchful stillness. We sat back down. The energy at the table shifted immediately, lighter, brighter, full of possibility. Ethan couldn't stop smiling. "I knew it," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I had a feeling. You've been acting different." Chloe laughed softly, placing a hand over her stomach. "Well, I guess I have a good reason." I noticed how deliberately she did that. The hand, the gesture. It wasn't unconscious, it was placed. Like she was reminding us all of something. I leaned back slightly, observing. That's early, isn't it? I asked carefully. To be showing already, it was a simple question, a reasonable one. Chloe didn't hesitate. Oh, every pregnancy is different, she said quickly, her smile unwavering. My doctor said some women show sooner than others. Her doctor? I nodded slowly. Which doctor are you seeing? There was a flicker, just a fraction of a second, but I saw it. Oh, just a specialist downtown, she replied lightly. Ethan's been so busy I've been handling most of the appointments myself, Ethan nodded. She didn't want to stress me out with all the details, he said. You know how work's been lately. I did know, but that wasn't the point. I folded my hands in my lap. That's understandable, I said, and I left it there. For the rest of the evening, Chloe spoke about the baby, but not the way most women do. She didn't talk about cravings or morning sickness or the strange, overwhelming emotions that come with creating life. Instead, she spoke about the future. We've been thinking about space, she said at one point, glancing around the dining room. A baby needs room to grow, stability, security. Ethan nodded again. I told Chloe the lake house would be perfect, he added. It's quiet, safe. My chest tightened slightly. The lake house, I repeated. Chloe smiled. It just makes sense, Audrey, she said gently. It's part of the family legacy, and this baby, well, her hand returned to her stomach. This baby is the future of that legacy. There it was. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. I took a sip of water to steady myself. That's a conversation for another time, I said calmly. Chloe didn't push. She didn't need to. The seed had been planted. The rest of the evening continued with the same strange balance celebration layered over something else, something quieter, sharper. After dessert, Chloe stood up slowly. I should rest, she said softly. Doctor's orders. Ethan immediately moved to help her. Of course, he said, let's get you home. They gathered their things. At the door, Chloe turned back toward me. Thank you for dinner, she said warmly. It means a lot, especially now. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, just a moment, the softness dropped. What replaced it wasn't anger or hostility. It was something colder, something calculating. Then it was gone. She smiled again, kissed my cheek lightly, and left. The door closed. The house fell silent. I stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I walked back into the dining room. The candles were still burning low, the plates half cleared, the faint scent of dinner lingering in the air. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. I sat down slowly in my chair, and I replayed every moment. The announcement, the answers, the gestures, the way every conversation somehow curved toward something else, toward money, toward property, toward control. I placed my hands flat against the table. Every pregnancy is different, she had said. Yes, that was true, but truth has a weight to it, and something about her words felt weightless. I exhaled slowly, my gaze drifting toward the window. Outside, the night was calm, still, unbothered by the quiet storm that had just begun inside my home. For the first time since she entered my life, I allowed myself to say it silently, not as an accusation, not as a conclusion, just as a possibility. Something isn't right, and once that thought takes root, it doesn't leave. In the weeks that followed, Chloe's pregnancy seemed to grow faster than anything else in my life, faster than logic, faster than comfort, and certainly faster than trust. At first, I tried to stay quiet. I told myself that doubt, especially at my age, could easily disguise itself as wisdom. I didn't want to become that woman, the one who questioned everything simply because the world had changed around her. But Chloe didn't make it easy to stay neutral. She began visiting more often, not for dinners, not for conversation, but for positioning. One afternoon, she arrived unannounced, her heels clicking softly across the hardwood floor, as if she already belonged there. "Audrey," she said warmly, stepping inside before I had fully opened the door. "I hope you don't mind. I was in the area." I stepped aside, watching her carefully. "Of course," I replied. She moved through my home with an ease that felt practiced. Her eyes lingered on things not with admiration, but with quiet calculation. The antique console table near the hallway, the original oil paintings Michael and I had collected during our travels, the framed documents on the wall, assets, not memories. We sat in the living room. She lowered herself carefully onto the couch, one hand immediately resting over her belly. Always that gesture, always that reminder. "How are you feeling?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. "Oh, tired," she said with a soft sigh. "The doctor says I need to avoid stress. It's not good for the baby." There it was again. Not concern, not vulnerability. A statement, a subtle instruction. I folded my hands in my lap. "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself," I said. She smiled. "I'm trying," she replied. Then after a brief pause, she leaned forward slightly. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you." I didn't respond. I simply waited. She glanced around the room again, then lowered her voice just enough to make it feel intimate. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," she said. "About stability." Her eyes met mine. "For the baby, of course." I nodded once, and she exhaled softly as if this conversation weighed heavily on her. "I know this isn't easy to talk about," she continued, "but Ethan and I have been discussing what's best for the next generation." Next generation, such a careful phrase. We believe it would bring peace of mind if certain things were already in place. I didn't blink. What things, I asked calmly. She hesitated just long enough to appear respectful. "A trust," she said finally. "For the baby. Something secure. Something that ensures continuity." Continuity. Another carefully chosen word. "And why now?" I asked. Her hand tightened slightly over her stomach. "Because stress is dangerous, Audrey," she replied softly. "An uncertainty. It creates stress." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "So this is about my decisions," I said. "It's about the baby," she corrected quickly. Of course it was. I let a moment pass before answering. "My decisions will always be made with care," I said. "Not pressure." Her smile didn't fade, but something behind it shifted. "I understand," she said lightly. "We just want to feel supported." Supported. Another word. Another layer. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Ethan stepped inside, loosening his tie. "Hey," he called. Then he saw Chloe and smiled immediately. "Oh, good you're here. I was hoping you'd stop by." He walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "How are you feeling?" She leaned into him slightly. "A little overwhelmed," she admitted. "But I was just talking to your mom about everything." Ethan looked at me. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Expectation. "Mom," he said gently, "we've been thinking a lot about the future." I held his gaze. I gathered that I replied. He hesitated, then stepped closer. I want to make sure Chloe doesn't feel stressed," he continued. "The doctor said." I heard I interrupted softly. The room fell quiet for a moment. Then Chloe spoke again, her voice even softer now. "It's not about money," she said. "It's about security." I almost smiled, because by then, I understood something clearly. When someone says, "It's not about money," it usually is. The conversation ended without resolution. Chloe didn't push further. Ethan didn't argue. But the air in the room had changed, and I knew this wasn't over, not even close. A few days later, I attended a charity gala downtown. It was one of those events Michael and I used to attend together, polished, predictable, full of familiar faces and quiet conversations. I still went out of habit, out of respect for the life we had built. The ballroom was warm with soft lighting, the sound of glasses clinking, voices blending into a low hum. And then I saw her, Chloe. She stood near the bar, dressed elegantly, her posture flawless as always. But this time, something was different. She wasn't holding her belly. She wasn't moving carefully. She wasn't acting pregnant. I slowed my steps, watching from a distance. She laughed at something someone said, reaching for a glass from the bar. A glass of champagne. I froze. She didn't hesitate, didn't second guess, didn't even glance around. She lifted the glass to her lips and took a sip. Not a symbolic one. Not a polite gesture. A real sip. Then another. My chest tightened. Every instinct I had sharpened in that moment. I took a step forward, then another. And just as I moved into her line of sight, her eyes met mine. Everything changed instantly. Her smile flickered, her hand lowered, and without a word, she placed the glass back onto the bar. Too quickly, too deliberately. "Audrey," she said, her voice bright again, "I didn't know you'd be here." I looked at the glass, then back at her. "Neither did I," Yen, I replied. She laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Holding it for someone, she added quickly, "Of course." I said nothing. I didn't need to, because in that moment, I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being cautious. I was seeing. Clearly, completely. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. I gave her a small, polite smile. "Enjoy your evening, Chloe," I said. Then I turned and walked away. But this time, I wasn't walking away from uncertainty. I was walking towards something else, something colder, something sharper, something that no longer needed to ask questions. Because now, I had my first answer. I didn't confront Chloe after the gala. That would have been the easy thing to do, and easy, I've learned, rarely leads to truth. Instead, I went home, took off my heels, and sat alone in the quiet living room Michael and I had once filled with plans and laughter. The clock ticked softly on the wall, the same clock he insisted we keep even when it ran a few seconds slow. Better to be slightly behind than rushing blindly ahead, he used to say. That night, I understood exactly what he meant, because for the first time since Chloe entered my life, I wasn't behind anymore. I was watching carefully, and I was ready to move at the right time. The next morning, I called Helen Brooks. If there was anyone in my life who could look at something emotional and strip it down to pure, undeniable reality, it was Helen. We had been friends for over 30 years long, before the business, before the money, before the world became something people tried to take from us. She had spent most of her life as a labor and delivery nurse. She had seen truth in its rawest form. "Come over," she said without hesitation, "and don't tell me anything on the phone. I want to see your face when you say it." An hour later, I was sitting at her kitchen table, a cup of strong coffee in my hands, telling her everything. Every word Chloe had said, every gesture, every inconsistency. And finally, the champagne. Helen didn't interrupt. She just listened, her eyes sharp, her fingers tapping lightly against the table in a slow, steady rhythm. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Well, she said plainly, either that girl is the most medically unique pregnant woman I've ever heard of, or she's not pregnant at all." I let out a quiet breath. "I thought you might say that." Helen tilted her head slightly. "No morning sickness?" she asked. "None that she's mentioned. No doctor's name, no. No scans you've actually seen in person." She showed Ethan a photo, but it looked generic. Helen nodded slowly. "And the belly?" I hesitated. "It doesn't move," I said finally. "Not naturally, it's always in place, exactly the same." Helen's expression didn't change. "That's because it probably is," she replied. A silence settled between us. Not heavy, not shocking, just confirming. "I need to be sure," I said. Helen leaned forward slightly. "Then you don't accuse her," she said. "Not yet. I wasn't planning to." "Good," she continued, "because if you're wrong, you lose your son. And if you're right, but you handle it badly, you still lose him." That landed harder than I expected. I looked down at my hands. "I'm already losing him," I said quietly. Helen softened just a little. "Then you need truth," she said, "not suspicion. Truth doesn't argue. It stands there and lets everyone see it." I nodded slowly. "How?" I asked. She tapped her fingers once more, then stopped. "If she's wearing something, a prosthetic, there will be tells," she said, "subtle ones. Like what? Weight distribution," she replied. "Movement. How she sits, how she stands. Real pregnancies shift constantly. They're uncomfortable. They change day to day. A fake one stays consistent." I thought about Chloe's posture, her perfect, careful movements, her controlled gestures. "She's too precise," I said. Helen gave a small, knowing smile. "That's because she's acting." The word hung in the air. Acting, not living, not experiencing, performing. Helen reached for her mug, taking a slow sip. "Here's the thing," she continued. "Women who fake pregnancies, they rely on emotion. They expect people to be too polite, too hopeful, to question them." I looked up. "That's exactly what she's doing." "I know," Helen said calmly. "So you don't fight emotion with emotion. You wait for a moment where reality can't be ignored. A moment." My mind began to turn. Slowly. Carefully. "What kind of moment?" I asked. Helen set her mug down. "The kind where everyone is watching," she said, "where there's no room for private excuses, no quiet explanations, public." My chest tightened slightly. "That could destroy Ethan," I said. Helen didn't flinch. "Or it could save him," she replied. We sat in silence again. because she was right. Pain, when hidden, festers, but when it's exposed, it has a chance to heal, eventually. I stood up, walking toward the window. Outside, the world moved as it always did, cars passing, people walking, life continuing without hesitation. And inside me, something had shifted. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, clearer. I won't accuse her, I said slowly, but I won't protect her either. Helen nodded. That's the right balance. I turned back to her. If I'm right, I added, I want it to be undeniable. It will be, she said, if you're patient. Over the next few days, I began to watch Chloe more closely than ever. Not obviously, not suspiciously, just attentively. She came by again that week, this time with Ethan. They sat in the living room, Chloe speaking softly about nursery ideas, color palettes, furniture placement. Something calm, she said. Something that feels permanent. Permanent. Another word, another layer. I observed everything. How she sat carefully lowering herself, but without the natural discomfort I had seen in truly pregnant women. How she stood, never adjusting her balance, never shifting her weight. How her hand returned to the same exact spot on her belly every single time. It wasn't instinct. It was repetition. A gesture practiced enough to feel real, but not real enough to be unconscious. At one point, Ethan stepped out to take a call. Chloe and I were alone. She looked at me, her smile soft. You've been very quiet lately, she said. I met her gaze. I've been thinking, I replied. About what I paused just long enough. About the future, I said. Her smile widened slightly. That's good, she said. We should all be thinking about the future. Yes, we should, because for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't doubting. I wasn't hoping I was wrong. I was preparing, carefully, patiently, and somewhere deep inside me, I could feel it. The moment Helen had described, the moment where truth would no longer need words. It would simply reveal itself. A week after my conversation with Helen, the truth began to reach me, not through suspicion, not through instinct, but through someone who had nothing to gain from lying. Her name was Rachel Turner. I hadn't seen her in years. She used to work in a design firm that occasionally partnered with my company, bright, observant, the kind of woman who noticed things others overlooked. We were never close, but we respected each other. That's why when she approached me at a fundraiser downtown, I knew immediately this wasn't a casual reunion. Audrey, she said softly, touching my arm just enough to stop me as I moved past the cocktail tables. I turned surprised. Rachel? I smiled politely. It's been a long time. Yes, she said, but she didn't smile the way people do when they're reminiscing. There was tension in her face, hesitation. Do you have a moment, she asked? Something in her tone made my chest tighten. Of course, I replied. We stepped away from the crowd toward a quieter corner near the terrace doors. Outside, the city lights shimmered faintly through the glass. Inside, the music and laughter faded into a distant hum. Rachel took a breath. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, she began. But after I realized who your son married, I couldn't ignore it. My pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. Say what exactly? I asked. She glanced over her shoulder as if confirming we were alone. The woman Ethan married. Chloe Whitmore, she said. That's not her original name. I didn't react, not outwardly, but inside, something clicked into place. What do you mean? I asked quietly. Rachel crossed her arms, her voice lowering. I knew her in Boston, she said. About 6, maybe 7 years ago. She went by Chloe Bennett back then. Bennett. The name meant nothing to me. But the fact that there was another name, that meant everything. She worked briefly at a marketing firm I collaborated with. Rachel continued. Smart. Very polished. But she had a reputation. What kind of reputation? I asked. Rachel hesitated. The kind that doesn't stay in one place for long, she said carefully. I held her gaze. Be specific. Rachel exhaled slowly. She dated wealthy men, she said. Older, established men. And every time, the relationship followed a pattern. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around my clutch. What pattern she would become indispensable, Rachel explained. Supportive, devoted. Then she'd start talking about the future security, shared assets, long-term planning. My stomach turned. And then I asked. Rachel's expression hardened just a little. Then things would get complicated, she said. Disputes, confusion, sometimes legal issues. Nothing that ever stuck, but enough to raise questions. How many times I asked? At least 3 that I know of, Rachel replied. Different cities, different names. I let that settle. Why didn't anyone stop her, I asked? Rachel gave a small, humorless laugh. Because she never crosses the line clearly enough, she said. She operates in gray areas, emotional leverage, verbal pressure, situations that are hard to prove. My mind moved quickly now, connecting everything. The questions, the pressure, the pregnancy. Why are you telling me this, I asked. Rachel met my eyes directly, because when I saw her here, with your son, I realized she had found something bigger than before she said, and I remembered how those other situations ended. How did they end? Rachel paused. Quietly, she said, always quietly. The men walked away, confused, embarrassed. Sometimes financially hurt, but never publicly. I nodded slowly. Of course, because shame keeps people silent. Do you have proof, I asked? Rachel shook her head. Not the kind you can take to court, she admitted. But I have emails, old contacts, people who would confirm what I'm telling you. That was enough. Not for accusation, but for confirmation. For direction. Thank you, I said sincerely. Rachel studied me for a moment. You already suspected something, didn't you? She asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She gave a small nod. Be careful, she said. She's very good at what she does. I allowed myself a faint smile. So am I replied. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat in my study, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. Michael's old desk stood in front of me, untouched since the day he passed. I opened the drawer slowly. Inside were years of documents, contracts, agreements, notes written in his steady handwriting. Proof of a life built carefully, protected intentionally. I ran my fingers over the edge of a file. She operates in gray areas, Rachel had said. Yes, that was exactly it. Chloe wasn't reckless. She wasn't obvious. She was strategic. And now, so was I. The next morning, I called David Lawson. If Rachel's information gave me context, David would give me structure. He answered on the second ring. Audrey, he said warmly, to what do I owe the pleasure I need you to look into someone, I said. His tone shifted immediately. Of course, he replied. Who, Chloe Whitmore, I said. Then after a brief pause, and possibly. Chloe Bennett. Silence. Then I understand, David said. I'll start immediately. Discreetly, I added. Always. Over the next few days, the pieces began to come together. David didn't find anything explosive, nothing criminal, nothing that would immediately destroy her. But what he did find was enough. Records tied to the name Chloe Bennett, a short-term business dispute involving shared assets, a dissolved engagement tied to financial disagreements, a pattern of movement Boston, then Atlanta, then Chicago, always upward, always towards something bigger. And now, Whitmore. I stood in my office looking out over the city as David finished summarizing his findings. It's circumstantial, he said, but consistent. Yes, I replied quietly. That's what concerns me. Do you want to take action, he asked. I thought for a moment. Then I shook my head. Not yet, I said, because this wasn't about legal action, not yet. This was about truth, and truth needed the right moment. Later that evening, Ethan called. Hey, Mom, he said, we're thinking about hosting something next week. What kind of something, I asked. A small gathering, he replied. Friends, family. Chloe wants to do a gender reveal. Of course she did. A public moment, a stage, exactly the kind of setting Helen had described. That sounds lovely, I said calmly. You don't mind hosting, he asked. Chloe thought it would mean more if it was at your place. Of course she did. I smiled to myself. Not at all, I replied. I'd be happy to. We ended the call shortly after, and as I set the phone down, I felt it. That shift, that certainty. The moment was coming, not by accident, not by chance, but by her own design, and this time, I would be ready. David Lawson arrived at my office on a quiet Tuesday morning with a slim leather folder tucked under his arm, the kind that never looks heavy no matter how much weight it carries. Everything I could find is in here, he said, placing it carefully on my desk. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I watched his face. David had worked with me for over 20 years. He had seen business disputes, family disagreements, even the occasional betrayal, but he had also learned to read situations the way I did, carefully, without rushing. What's your impression, I asked. He leaned back slightly in his chair. My impression, he said slowly, is that Chloe Whitmore, if that's the name we're using, is very deliberate. I nodded once. That matches what I've seen. He folded his hands. She doesn't leave obvious trails, he continued. No criminal charges, no direct fraud cases that would hold up in court. But I prompted. But there's a pattern, he said. Short-term relationships tied to financial proximity. Disputes that never escalate publicly. Strategic exits. Strategic exits. The phrase echoed in my mind. Does she gain anything in those exits, I asked? David hesitated. Not always money directly, he said, but access. Connections. Sometimes temporary control over shared assets before things dissolve. I exhaled slowly. So she moves forward each time. Yes. And now, I said quietly, she's here. David met my gaze. Yes, he confirmed. A silence settled between us, not uncertain, not confused, but resolved, because by then I wasn't asking whether Chloe was dangerous. I was asking how far she was willing to go. David tapped the folder lightly. There's something else, he added. I looked up. She's been making inquiries, he said. Inquiries about property valuations, he clarified. Specifically, your lake house. My chest tightened not from surprise, but from confirmation. How recent, I asked. Within the last 2 weeks, of course. Always moving ahead, always preparing. Through what channel, I asked. An intermediary, David replied. A broker who didn't realize who she was connected to. I nodded slowly. She's testing the ground, I said. Yes, he agreed. And if I had to guess, she's positioning herself for a future claim, something tied to family expansion, inheritance expectations, the baby. Everything circled back to that. I stood up, walking toward the window. Below, the city moved with its usual rhythm, cars weaving through traffic, people crossing streets, life continuing without hesitation. Inside, however, things were becoming very clear. She wants legitimacy, I said, not just access. David considered that. Yes, he said. And a child, real or otherwise, creates a powerful narrative. Narrative, that was the word. Chloe wasn't just creating pressure, she was building a story. One that others would believe. One that would make me look unreasonable if I refused. I turned back to him. She's already started telling people, hasn't she? David didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. He said. Who mutual contacts, he replied. A few business associates, some members of your extended social circle. My jaw tightened slightly. And what exactly is she telling them that you're planning to secure your assets for the next generation, he said. That you've been discussing a trust for the baby. I let out a quiet breath. She's not just preparing, I said. She's shaping perception. David nodded, and perception, he added, can become pressure very quickly. I knew that better than anyone. In business, in family, in life. Once people believe something is already decided, it becomes much harder to say no. I walked back to my desk and finally opened the folder. Inside were neatly organized documents, names, dates, notes, connections, nothing explosive, but together. They formed a picture, a very clear one. She's good, I said quietly. David gave a small nod. Yes, he agreed, she is. I closed the folder, but not careful enough, I added. He raised an eyebrow slightly. What do you mean? I looked at him directly. She's moving too quickly, I said, and she's relying on something unstable. The pregnancy, he said. Yes. David leaned forward slightly. If that's false, he said, everything collapses. I held his gaze. It is false, I replied. He didn't question me. He didn't need to. Then the question becomes, he said, how do you prove it? I thought of Helen, of Rachel, of everything I had seen with my own eyes. You don't prove something like this quietly, I said. David's expression sharpened. No, he agreed, you don't. That afternoon, Chloe called me. Her voice was bright, cheerful, perfectly composed. Audrey, she said, I just wanted to thank you again for hosting next week. You're welcome, I replied. We're really excited, she continued. It's important for Ethan, for the family. I listened carefully. And for the baby, she added. Of course, I said. There was a brief pause. Then she spoke again, her tone softer now. I think it's going to be a beautiful moment, she said. A chance for everyone to come together and look forward. Forward. Always forward. Never backward. Never into truth. I agree, I said calmly. I was also thinking, she continued, it might be a good time to share intentions. Intentions. Another carefully chosen word. What kind of intentions, I asked. Oh, nothing formal, she said lightly. Just reassurance. For everyone, especially the baby. I smiled faintly. I'll think about it, I replied. That's all I ask, she said, sweetly. We ended the call, and I sat there for a long moment holding the phone in my hand, because by then, there was no doubt left, no uncertainty, no hesitation. Chloe wasn't just manipulating Ethan, she was orchestrating something much larger, a public expectation, a narrative that would corner me, force me, pressure me into compliance, unless I changed the story. That evening, I went into my sewing room. It was one of the few spaces in the house that still felt entirely mine, unchanged, untouched quiet. I opened a small wooden box and ran my fingers over its contents, needles, threads, tools I had used for years, and then I saw it. The hat pin. Long, elegant, sharp, a relic from another time, a tool designed for precision, for detail, for quiet, deliberate action. I picked it up slowly, holding it between my fingers. It was light, deceptively so. I turned it slightly, watching how it caught the light, and in that moment, everything aligned. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but logically, cleanly. If Chloe had built her entire strategy around illusion, then all I needed was one small moment of reality. I placed the pin back into the box, closed the lid, and exhaled. The dinner was coming. The stage was set, the audience would be there, and Chloe would walk directly into the moment she had created. Only this time, it wouldn't belong to her. The hardest part wasn't proving Chloe wrong. It was realizing my son no longer trusted me enough to hear the truth. I called Ethan 2 days before the dinner, not because I doubted what I knew, but because some small, stubborn part of me still hoped I could reach him before everything broke. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hey, Mom. His voice sounded normal, calm, unaware of the quiet storm building beneath everything. Hi, sweetheart, I said gently. Are you busy? A little, but I can talk. What's up? I hesitated for just a moment. Could you come by tonight? I asked. Just you. There was a pause. Then, yeah. Okay, he said. Everything all right? I just want to talk, I replied. Another pause. Okay, he said again. I'll be there. He arrived just after 7. No Chloe. That at least was something. I had set the kitchen the way I used to when he was younger. Simple, warm, familiar. No formal table. Just 2 plates, 2 glasses, a quiet space where conversation could breathe. He walked in, loosening his jacket. This feels serious, he said with a small smile. It is, I replied. He sat down across from me, studying my face. You're worrying me, he added. I folded my hands gently on the table. I don't want to fight with you, I said. Okay, he replied cautiously. I just need you to listen, I continued, without interrupting, without defending anyone. Just listen. He nodded slowly. All right. I took a breath. Ethan, something about Chloe's pregnancy doesn't make sense. The shift in him was immediate, subtle, but unmistakable. His shoulders tightened. His eyes narrowed just slightly. Mom, he said, already preparing to push back. I asked you to listen, I reminded him softly. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Fine, go ahead. I chose my words carefully. I've noticed inconsistencies, I said. Details that don't align. Medical things. Behavioral things. He shook his head immediately. Mom, you're not a doctor. No, I agreed, but I've spoken to someone who is. He frowned. Who, Helen? He hesitated. Helen thinks something is wrong, he asked. She thinks it's possible Chloe isn't pregnant at all, I said calmly. The silence that followed was sharp, heavy. Then, that's ridiculous. The words came quickly, too quickly. I know how it sounds, I said. No, Mom. He interrupted. It doesn't just sound bad, it is bad. I held his gaze. Have you been to an appointment with her? I asked. He blinked. That's not. Have you heard the heartbeat? I continued gently. He looked away. She handles the medical stuff, he said. Do you know the doctor's name? He didn't answer. I leaned forward slightly. Ethan, I'm not trying to hurt you, I said. I'm trying to protect you. From what he snapped. From being manipulated. That did it. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. This is exactly what Chloe said you'd do, he said, his voice rising. I froze. What did she say? I asked quietly. That you'd question her, he replied. That you'd make this about control, about money, about your need to hold on to everything. My chest tightened. She told you that... She was worried you wouldn't accept the baby, he continued, that you'd find a reason to doubt her. I stood up slowly. And you believed that I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I believe my wife," he said. The words landed harder than anything else he had said, not because they were wrong, but because they were blind. "I'm your mother," I said softly. "And she's my family," he shot back. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said, "she is." We stood there facing each other across the small kitchen, two people who loved each other, and suddenly couldn't understand each other at all. "I'm not asking you to choose," I said carefully. "I'm asking you to look." "I have looked," he said, "and all I see is you refusing to accept that things are changing. Changing. That word again. I have accepted many things in my life," I replied. "Loss, grief, loneliness. I can accept change." I paused. "But I will not accept lies." His jaw tightened. "You don't know that she's lying." "I know something is wrong," I said, "and that's not the same thing." "No," I agreed, "it's not." A silence stretched between us. Then I asked the question I had been holding back. "If you found out she wasn't pregnant," I said quietly, "what would you do?" He stared at me, as if I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "That's not even a real question," he said. "It is to me." He shook his head, backing away slightly. "I'm not having this conversation," he said. "Because you're afraid of the answer," I replied. That stopped him, for just a second. Then anger returned, sharper this time. "No," he said, "because I trust my wife." I nodded. "I understand," I said. And I did. That was the hardest part. Understanding didn't make it easier. It just made it clearer. He grabbed his jacket. "I think you need some time," he said, "to process this. Because right now, you're not being fair." Fair. Another word. Another shield. "I hope I'm wrong," I said softly. He didn't respond, he just walked to the door. And before he left, he turned back one last time. "You're going to hurt a lot of people if you keep going like this," he said. Then he left. The door closed behind him. And just like that, the house was quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Not empty, not unfinished, resolved. I stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of everything settle. The truth, the distance, the reality that no matter what happened next, something between us had already broken. Slowly, I walked back to the table. 2 plates, 2 glasses, 1 untouched. I sat down. And for the first time since this began, I stopped hoping he would see it on his own. Because hope I had already failed. Now, there was only one path left. Truth, and truth would not be gentle. The morning of the dinner arrived with a strange kind of stillness. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes before something breaks. I woke before sunrise, as I often did, but this time there was no lingering in bed, no slow transition into the day. My mind was already clear, focused, prepared. This was the day Chloe had been building toward, and now, so was I. I moved through the house methodically. Every detail mattered, not because I cared about appearances, but because Chloe did. The dining table was set with precision. White linen, polished silverware, crystal glasses that caught the light just enough to feel elegant without being excessive. Fresh flowers arranged carefully at the center, simple, tasteful, controlled. A perfect stage. By mid-morning, the house was quiet again. The calm before everything shifted. I walked into my sewing room. The small wooden box sat exactly where I had left it. I opened it slowly. The hat pin lay inside, resting against soft fabric, its slender form almost delicate. But I knew better. I picked it up, turning it gently between my fingers. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't anger. It was certainty. A single point of truth. I placed it carefully into the inside pocket of my dress. Then I closed the box, and I didn't look back. By early evening, the guests began to arrive. Familiar faces, neighbors, family friends, a few business associates who had known me and Michael for years. Among them were Helen standing quietly near the back with her observant eyes, and David Lawson, composed as always, blending into the room as if he were simply another guest. Pastor Samuel Grant arrived shortly after greeting me warmly. "It's good to see you, Audrey," he said. "And you," I replied. His presence mattered, not for judgment, but for witness. Because what was about to happen would not remain private. Ethan and Chloe arrived last. Of course they did. Timing was part of presentation. Chloe entered first, her smile radiant, her hand resting gently over her belly as if it were the center of the room, which in many ways it was. The dress she wore was soft and flowing, designed to accentuate the curve she wanted everyone to see. Ethan followed close behind, one hand instinctively at her back, protective, proud, unaware. Chloe said warmly, stepping forward. "Everything looks beautiful." "Thank you," I replied. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, the performance dropped, just slightly. Enough for me to see it, awareness, calculation. Then it was gone, replaced with softness. Ethan hugged me. "Thanks for doing this, Mom," he said. "It means a lot." I placed a hand on his arm. "I know it does," I said, and I meant that. The evening unfolded exactly as Chloe intended. Laughter filled the room. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed easily. And at the center of it all, Chloe. She moved gracefully from group to group, accepting congratulations, placing her hand over her belly at just the right moments, speaking about the future with gentle excitement. "Everything changes now," she said to one guest. "This baby is going to bring so much joy," she told another. "And stability," she added quietly, just loud enough for the right people to hear. Always that word, always that direction. I watched from a distance, not hiding, not avoiding, simply observing. Helen caught my eye, once giving the slightest nod. She saw it too, the precision, the performance, the consistency. Nothing about Chloe changed. Not her posture, not her movements, not her carefully placed gestures. A perfect illusion. Until it wasn't. Dinner was served. Everyone gathered around the table. Chloe sat beside Ethan, directly across from me. Exactly where she wanted to be. The room settled into a quieter rhythm as plates were passed. Conversations softened. Attention began to focus. This was the moment. I could feel it. The shift, the tightening of something invisible in the air. Chloe waited until dessert was served. Of course she did. Timing, always timing. She set her fork down gently, placed her hand over her belly, and let out a soft breath. "I just want to say something," she began. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward her. Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. She smiled at him, then looked around the table. "I know this is a happy moment," she said, her voice warm, slightly emotional, "but it's also a serious one." A few guests nodded, listening, engaged, exactly as she wanted. "Bringing a child into the world changes everything," she continued. "It makes you think about the future, about what kind of life you want to provide." Her eyes shifted slowly, deliberately, until they landed on me. "And about security," she added softly. There it was, the turn. The moment where celebration became pressure. Ethan looked at me now, not aggressively, not forcefully, but expectantly. "Mom," he said gently, "we've been talking about things, about the future." I didn't respond. I let him continue. We want to make sure everything is stable," he said, "for the baby. The baby. Always the baby." Chloe leaned slightly toward him, her expression vulnerable. "We don't need anything extravagant," she said. "Just reassurance. Something that shows we're all on the same page." Reassurance. Another word. Another layer. The room was completely still now. Waiting. Watching. Judging. Because this wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a performance. A public expectation. A moment designed to corner me. To make refusal look like cruelty. To make hesitation look like selfishness. I felt every eye in the room, every silent assumption, every quiet pressure, and for a moment, I understood exactly what Chloe had built. It was elegant, careful, effective. If I refused, I would look cold. If I agreed, I would lose control. A perfect trap. Unless I changed the rules. I placed my napkin gently on the table and stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, not rushed, not emotional, just final. The room shifted instantly. Conversations stopped. Eyes followed me. Ethan frowned slightly. "Mom," he said. I looked at him, then at Chloe, then at everyone. My husband used to say something. I began calmly. He believed that the strongest foundations are built on truth, not assumption. A few people exchanged glances. Chloe's smile tightened just slightly. "I think that's a beautiful sentiment," she said softly. "Yes," I replied. "It is." I stepped away from the table. No one spoke. No one moved. I walked across the room, past the guests, past the soft light, toward the quiet corner where my sewing things were kept. I reached inside and closed my fingers around something familiar, something small, something precise. Then I turned and began walking back toward Chloe. The room felt different now. Not warm, not welcoming, sharp, still, waiting. Chloe's smile faltered, just slightly. "Audrey," she said. But I didn't answer. I simply walked forward, one step at a time, until I was standing directly in front of her, and in my hand was the hat pin. The moment I stopped in front of Chloe, the room seemed to forget how to breathe. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the soft hum of conversation from moments before had vanished, replaced by something heavier, something waiting. Chloe's smile lingered, but only barely. "Audrey," she said again, her voice light, uncertain. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at her. Not the performance, not the polished version she showed the world, but the small details she couldn't fully control. The stillness of her posture, the way her hand hovered just slightly too deliberately over her belly, the faint tension in her shoulders. She knew, not everything, but enough. "I was listening to you," I said calmly, "about security, about the future." Her smile returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "I just think it's important for everyone to feel safe. I nodded slowly. "I agree," I replied. Behind her, Ethan shifted in his chair. "Mom," he said carefully, "what's going on?" I didn't look at him. Not yet, because if I did, I might hesitate, and hesitation had already cost too much. Instead, I raised the hat pin slightly, holding it between my fingers. A simple object, thin, elegant, almost harmless, but in that moment, it carried everything. Chloe's eyes flickered down to it, then back to me. A crack, small but real. "That's interesting," she said lightly, forcing a small laugh. "Is this some kind of truth doesn't need a speech?" I said gently. The room went completely still. I took one small step closer, not aggressive, not rushed, just certain. Chloe leaned back slightly in her chair. Instinct, uncontrolled. Audrey, Ethan said more firmly now, standing halfway up. "Stop, what are you doing?" I finally turned my head toward him. "Just for a moment, showing you something I said." Then I looked back at Chloe. Her hand had pressed more firmly against her belly now. Protective or defensive, the difference mattered. "You said every pregnancy is different," I continued quietly. She nodded quickly. "Yes, exactly." "Then this won't matter," I said. And before anyone could fully process what I meant, I moved. It wasn't fast, it wasn't dramatic, just a precise, controlled motion. The tip of the hat pin touched the side of her dress, right where the curve of her belly rose most prominently. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then a soft, unmistakable sound, a faint hollow. Pop. The air changed instantly. Chloe froze. Her eyes widened, not in confusion, not in shock, but in recognition. Her hand jerked downward. Too late. The curve beneath the fabric shifted, collapsed. Not like flesh, not like life, but like something empty, something artificial. A ripple moved through the room. Someone gasped. Another voice whispered, "Oh my God!" Ethan stood up fully now. What was that?" he said, his voice breaking. Chloe's face had gone pale. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I stepped back, slowly lowering the pin, and said nothing, because I didn't need to. The truth was already speaking. The shape of her body had changed, subtly, but unmistakably. The rounded fullness she had carried for weeks was no longer there, not completely, not convincingly, just wrong. "Chloe," Ethan said, his voice trembling now. "What just happened?" She looked at him, desperately, searching for something to say, something to hold on to. It's just," she stammered. "It's a support wrap, my doctor said." "No," a voice cut in quietly. "Helen." She stepped forward from the edge of the room, her expression calm, steady, grounded in something far stronger than emotion. "That's not a medical support wrap," she said. Chloe turned toward her, panic flashing across her face. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. Helen didn't react. "I spent 32 years in labor and delivery," she replied evenly. "I know exactly what I'm looking at." The room tightened again, all eyes moving between them, between the truth and the last attempts to deny it. Ethan looked back at Chloe. His face had changed, completely. The certainty was gone, the warmth, the trust, all replaced by something raw, something fragile. "Chloe," he said slowly, "tell me what's going on. She shook her head quickly. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is ridiculous. She attacked me." "I didn't attack you," I said calmly. My voice was steady, unshaken. "I revealed you." That word landed heavily. Revealed. Because that's what this was. Not an accusation, not a guess. A revelation. Chloe's breathing had become uneven now, her composure slipping, her control unraveling. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising. "I'm pregnant. I've told you that. I've shown. You've performed," I said quietly. Silence. Complete. Final. And in that silence, everything she had built began to collapse. For a moment after the sound, that soft, hollow pop, the world seemed to tilt. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to make everything wrong. Chloe didn't move. Her hand was still pressed against her stomach. But now it wasn't a gesture, it was a grip. A desperate attempt to hold something together that had already come apart. Ethan stood frozen beside her. His eyes moved slowly from her face to her body, and then back to me. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice thin, unsteady. I met his gaze calmly. "I showed you the truth," I said. Behind him, someone shifted in their chair. A glass clinked faintly against the table. The smallest sounds now felt too loud, too sharp in the silence. Chloe finally moved, just slightly. Her fingers tightened against the fabric of her dress as if pressing hard enough might restore what had been lost. "It's just a wrap," she said again, more urgently this time. "It's for support." "My doctor." Helen interrupted quietly. She stepped closer now, her presence grounded, immovable. "That is not how a pregnancy support wrap behaves," she said, "and it certainly doesn't deflate." A murmur rippled through the room. The word lingered. Deflate. It sounded absurd, cruel, but undeniable. Ethan's breathing grew heavier. "Chloe," he said slowly, as if each syllable weighed something. "Is that true?" She shook her head quickly. "Of course not," she said. "They're twisting things. This is humiliating." Her eyes darted toward me. "You had no right to do that," she snapped. I didn't respond to the accusation, because rights had nothing to do with this anymore. Only truth. I took a step back, giving her space. "Then show us," I said. The words were quiet, simple, but they landed harder than anything else I could have said. "Show us that I'm wrong." The room held its breath. Chloe stared at me, then at Ethan, then around the table, every face watching, every expression shifting from confusion to doubt to something much sharper. "No," she said finally, her voice tight. "I don't have to prove anything to anyone." Ethan's head turned slightly. That was the moment, the smallest shift, but I saw it. The first fracture in his belief. "Why not?" he asked. She looked at him, startled. "Because this is private," she said quickly. "Because I'm being attacked." "You said this was about family," he interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it was different, clearer, more focused. "You made this public," he continued. "You wanted everyone here tonight." Chloe's lips parted. No words came out. Because he was right. She had created this stage, and now she couldn't control it. "I'm not doing this," she said suddenly, pushing her chair back. "This is ridiculous. I'm leaving." She stood up quickly, too quickly, and that was when it happened. The movement, sharp, unbalanced, shifted the fabric of her dress just enough for the truth to slip. A faint outline, a seam, something beneath the surface that didn't belong. Helen saw it, so did I, and judging by the collective intake of breath around the room, so did everyone else. Helen said quietly, "If you walk out now, you're confirming it." Chloe froze, just for a second, then she turned, her eyes flashing with anger. "You don't get to tell me what I'm confirming," she snapped. "No," Helen replied calmly. "You already did." Silence fell again, heavier this time, because now there was no confusion left, only denial. Ethan took a step forward. "Stop," he said. Chloe turned back to him. "Ethan, don't stop," he repeated. His voice shook, but he didn't look away. "Just stop," he said again, softer now. Something in her expression changed. Not fear, not yet. Something closer to calculation. A quick assessment, a shift in strategy. Then her shoulders dropped, slightly, and the performance changed. Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't want this to happen like this," she whispered. The room leaned in, not physically, but emotionally, because now she was changing tactics. "I was going to tell you," she continued, her voice trembling. I didn't know how. Ethan stared at her. "What are you saying?" he asked. She looked down, her hands falling away from her stomach. "I lost the baby," she said softly. A ripple moved through the room. Sympathy, confusion, doubt. A new story. "I didn't want to hurt you," she added, her voice breaking. "I thought, if I just waited, if I just kept things normal for a little while." She wiped at her eyes. "I was scared. It was good. Very good. Convincing. Almost. But not quite. Because grief has a weight to it. A presence. And this did not." Helen stepped forward again. "That's not how grief behaves either," she said quietly. Chloe's head snapped up. "Excuse me. You don't fake a pregnancy after a miscarriage," Helen continued. "You don't build it into a narrative. You don't use it to discuss property transfers." Each word landed cleanly, precisely, like truth does. Chloe's tears stopped. Just like that, the emotion, gone, replaced by something colder. "You don't know anything about me," she said flatly. "No," Helen replied, "but I know patterns." Chloe turned toward me then, and for the first time since I had known her, the mask didn't come back. "You think you've won something?" she said quietly. I held her gaze. "This isn't about winning," I said. "It never is for people like you," she replied. "People like me." The words hung there, heavy, revealing, and in that moment, whatever was left of her performance disappeared completely, because the truth wasn't just visible now, it was undeniable. Ket Thuk Pan 11. Chep Tuk Yu Kao Viet Du 1000 to 1200 to Theo Quay Din Viet Bang Tieng An Pan 12. The room didn't erupt the way people expect in moments like that. There was no shouting, no dramatic collapse, just silence, a deep, suffocating kind of silence that settles when everyone realizes they've been standing inside a lie. Chloe was the only one still moving, not physically, but mentally. You could see it in her eyes, the way she recalculated, reassessed, adjusted. She wasn't breaking, she was shifting. And that, more than anything else, told me exactly who she was. Ethan hadn't moved. He stood beside his chair staring at her as if trying to piece together something that no longer made sense. "You lost the baby," he said slowly. Chloe nodded, her expression carefully softened again. "Yes," she whispered, "a few weeks ago. And you didn't tell me," he asked. Her lips trembled slightly. "I couldn't," she said. "You were already under so much pressure." I didn't want to add to it. The room leaned into that explanation, because it sounded kind, sacrificial, reasonable. But Ethan didn't respond right away. He was thinking now, really thinking, and that was something Chloe hadn't planned for. When he asked, the question was simple, but precise. Chloe hesitated. "About 3 weeks ago," she said. Ethan's brow furrowed. 3 weeks, he repeated. She nodded quickly. "Yes." He looked down for a moment, then back at her. 3 weeks ago, he said again, slower this time. "That's when we had dinner with my mom. That's when you told us you were pregnant." The silence sharpened. Chloe didn't answer. "You said you had just found out," he continued. "You were excited. I was trying to stay positive," she interrupted quickly. "Sometimes doctors aren't sure, sometimes things are unclear." "That's not what you said," he cut in. His voice was still quiet, but there was something new in it now, not anger. Not yet. Clarity. "You told me you had already been to appointments," he said. "You showed me an ultrasound." Chloe's eyes flickered. "It was early," she said. "Things change, stop." The word came out sharper this time, and it stopped her, because this wasn't denial anymore. This was recognition. Ethan ran a hand over his face, pacing once beside the table. "Just stop," he said again, quieter now. He looked at me, then at Helen, then back at Chloe, and finally, he saw. Not all at once, but enough. "Was any of it real?" he asked. Chloe didn't answer. Not immediately, and that was the answer. A soft, almost inaudible sound came from somewhere behind me. Someone exhaling. Someone realizing. Ethan's shoulders dropped slightly, as if something inside him had finally given way. "Wow," he said under his breath. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken. Chloe stepped forward. "Ethan, listen to me." "No," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. But the finality in that single word was stronger than anything else in the room. "No," he repeated. She stopped. For the first time since this began, she didn't have control. "I need you to be honest with me," he said, "right now." Chloe swallowed. Her eyes moved again, calculating, searching. But there was nowhere left to go. No angle left to play. She started, then stopped, then tried again. "I thought I could make it real," she said finally. The words were quiet, almost reflective, and they landed like a stone. Ethan stared at her. "What does that even mean?" he asked. She looked at him, her expression shifting not into softness, not into remorse, but into something colder, more honest. "I thought if we had a future," she said slowly, "everything else would fall into place." "That's not an answer," he said. "It is," she replied. Her voice steadied now. No trembling, no performance, just truth. "I needed stability," she continued. "I needed something secure, something permanent." Ethan's face tightened. "So you lied," he said. "I adapted," she corrected. The word echoed in the room. Adapted, not apologized, not regretted, just reframed. "And the baby?" he asked. Chloe hesitated. "Then there was never a baby," she said. The sentence was simple, clean and devastating. A few people gasped. Others looked away. Because now, there was no illusion left, only reality. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment, then he opened them again, and something had changed. Not completely, not healed, but shifted. "You use that," he said quietly. "You use something like that to manipulate me." Chloe didn't flinch. "I used what worked," she said. The honesty was brutal, unfiltered, and for the first time, it matched the truth. David Lawson stepped forward slightly. "That includes inquiries about property," he said calmly, "specifically the lake house." Chloe's head turned sharply toward him. "You had no right." "Actually," he interrupted, "I do. I represent Audrey." The air tightened again. Chloe looked back at me, and this time, there was no mask, no softness, no charm, just resentment. "You think this is over," she said. I met her gaze. "It already is," I replied. She let out a short, bitter laugh. "You humiliated me," she said. "No," I said calmly, "you revealed yourself." The distinction mattered because I hadn't created anything. I had simply removed the cover. Chloe's eyes darkened. "You'll regret this," she said, "perhaps, but not in the way she thought." "Leave, Ethan," said quietly. She turned to him. "Ethan, leave," he repeated. This time there was no hesitation, no confusion, just decision. Chloe stood there for a moment longer, looking at him, at me, at the room, and then she turned and walked out. No performance, no final words, just footsteps fading into silence. And when the door closed behind her, the house felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but true. The door closed behind Chloe with a quiet final sound. Not loud, not dramatic, but it carried the weight of everything that had just collapsed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked down at their plates as if unsure where to place their eyes now that the illusion had disappeared. Others exchanged glances, those silent, knowing looks people share when something uncomfortable had just become undeniable. Pastor Grant cleared his throat softly. "I think perhaps we should give the family a moment," he said gently. One by one, people began to rise. There were no loud goodbyes, no polite conversations, just quiet exits, respectful, careful. Within minutes, the house that had been filled with voices and expectation was empty again, except for Ethan and me and the truth. He hadn't moved, not from the spot where Chloe had left him. His hands hung loosely at his sides, his shoulders slightly slumped, not in defeat, but in something deeper, disorientation. I watched him for a moment, not as a mother rushing to comfort, but as someone trying to understand what remained after everything had been stripped away. "Ethan," I said softly. He didn't respond. He walked slowly to the chair and sat down, staring at the table as if something might still be there, something he had missed. "I don't understand," he murmured. The words weren't directed at me. They were directed at the space where his belief had been. I stepped closer, but not too close. "I know," I said. He shook his head. "No. I saw her every day," he said. "I talked to her. I trusted her." His voice faltered on that last word. Trusted. I sat down across from him. "That's what trust does," I said quietly. "It fills in the gaps so we don't have to question what we want to believe." He let out a small, hollow laugh. "So I just made it real in my head?" he asked. "No," I said. "You chose to believe in something that felt right." He looked up at me then. "And you didn't?" he asked. There was no accusation in his voice, just confusion, pain. "I wanted to," I said honestly. His eyes searched mine. "Then why didn't you?" he asked. Because I saw. Because I paid attention. Because I've lived long enough to recognize when something doesn't carry the weight of truth. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said something simpler. Because I asked questions, I replied. He looked down again. I should have asked questions, he said. The admission was quiet, but it mattered. More than anything else he had said so far. I leaned back slightly. Yes, I said. A silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, not tense. Just real. After a while, he spoke again. Did you know for sure, he asked? I shook my head. No, I said, not at first. He nodded slowly. But you were willing to do that, he said, glancing toward where the moment had unfolded. In front of everyone. I followed his gaze. I was willing to let the truth be seen, I said. He swallowed. That could have gone very differently, he said. Yes, I agreed. He looked back at me. And you still did it? Yes. Another pause. Then I thought you were being controlling, he admitted. I thought, you just didn't want to let go. The words didn't hurt. Not anymore. I know, I said. He exhaled slowly. I chose her over you, he said. This time there was weight in his voice. Awareness. Regret. Yes, I replied gently. He nodded. I kept thinking, if I just supported her, everything would settle, he said. That it would all make sense eventually. That's a common hope, I said. He gave a faint, bitter smile. Hope he repeated. Then his expression shifted. More serious now. Was I part of it, he asked? The question surprised me. But I understood it. He wasn't asking if he had planned it. He was asking if he had enabled it. I considered my answer carefully. You weren't part of the lie, I said. He looked up. But you protected it, I added. The truth landed quietly. He didn't argue, didn't defend, he just accepted it. I ignored things, he said. I didn't want to see them. Yes, I said. He leaned back in his chair, running both hands over his face. I feel like an idiot, he muttered. No, I said firmly. He looked at me. You feel like someone who trusted the wrong person, I continued. That's not the same thing. He held my gaze for a long moment, and something shifted again. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Why didn't you just tell me everything he asked? About her past, about what you found? I shook my head slightly. Because it wouldn't have mattered, I said. He frowned. It would have he insisted. No, I said calmly. You would have defended her. You would have explained it away. You would have believed her over me. He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Because he knew I was right. I needed you to see it, I said, not hear it. He looked down again, and this time, there was no resistance, just acceptance. After a while, he stood up, slowly. I don't know what happens now, he said. Neither did I. Not completely, but I knew one thing. Now I said you decide what kind of man you want to be. He looked at me. And what if I already failed that he asked? You did, I said. The honesty didn't break him. It grounded him. But that doesn't mean you stay there, I added. He nodded slowly, taking that in, piece by piece. I need time, he said. I know, I replied. He hesitated. Then I'm sorry, he said. The words were simple, but they were real. Not defensive, not rushed, just honest. I stood up, walked over to him, and for the first time that night, I placed a hand on his arm. I know, I said, that was all. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something closer to it than we had been before. He nodded once, then turned, and walked out the door. This time, not running from the truth, but carrying it with him, and as the house fell quiet again, I realized something. The hardest part wasn't exposing Chloe. It was letting my son face what came after. The days after the dinner didn't feel like victory. They felt quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comforts you, the kind that asks questions, the kind that lingers in corners waiting for you to decide what comes next. For the first time in a long while, my house was completely still again. No tension, no careful conversations, no subtle manipulations wrapped in polite smiles. Just me and the truth. I moved through my days slowly, not because I was weak, but because I was deliberate. There's a difference. I didn't call Ethan, and he didn't call me. Not at first. That distance wasn't punishment. It was space. Space for him to feel what had happened. Space for me to let go of what I couldn't control. Because love, especially the kind that survives betrayal, needs room to breathe before it can stand again. A week later, I received the first real update. Not from Ethan, From David. He sat across from me in my office, his expression steady as always, though there was something softer behind it now. "It's moving forward," he said. "The divorce?" I asked. He nodded. Yes. Ethan filed. I absorbed that quietly, not with relief, not with satisfaction, just acknowledgement. "And Chloe?" I asked. David exhaled slightly. "She's contesting some aspects," he said, not aggressively, but strategically. Of course she was. "What does she want?" I asked. "Leverage," he replied simply. I nodded. "She won't get it?" I said. "No," he agreed. "She won't." There was a pause. Then he added, "There may also be civil implications." I looked at him. "Because of the deception," he explained, "the financial pressure tied to false representation. It's not guaranteed, but there's enough there to pursue." I thought about that, carefully. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. David tilted his head slightly. "You don't want to pursue it?" "No," I repeated. "May I ask why?" I leaned back in my chair. "Because I've already taken back what matters," I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Understood. And that was that. Because not every battle needs to be finished in court. Some end the moment truth steps into the light. Ethan came to see me 2 weeks later. He didn't call first. He didn't announce himself. He just showed up. I heard the knock while I was in the kitchen. Soft, hesitant. I knew it was him before I opened the door. He looked different. Not physically, but in the way he carried himself. Less certain, less guarded, more real. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi," I replied. We stood there for a moment, not awkward, just adjusting. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in, slowly glancing around the house as if seeing it for the first time in a long while. Or maybe seeing it clearly for the first time. We sat in the living room, the same place where so many conversations had once felt easy. This one didn't, but it was honest, and that mattered more. "I've been going to therapy," he said after a moment. I nodded. "I'm glad." He looked at his hands. "I didn't think I needed it," he admitted. "But I did." "Yes," I said. He gave a small, self-aware smile. "That seems to be a pattern," he said. I didn't correct him, because he wasn't wrong. I'd been thinking about everything, he continued. About what I missed, what I ignored. I listened, not interrupting, not guiding, just letting him speak. I kept telling myself I was protecting something he said, the relationship, the future, the idea of a family. His voice softened slightly, but I wasn't protecting anything he added. I was avoiding reality. That word again, reality. I didn't want to see the gaps, he said, because if I saw them, I'd have to admit something was wrong. I leaned forward slightly, and now I asked. He looked up at me. "Now I know something was wrong," he said, simple, clear, no excuses, and that mattered. We sat in silence for a moment, then he spoke again. "I also know I hurt you," he said. I didn't answer right away, because this part needed to be real. "You did," I said finally. He nodded. "I chose not to trust you," he said. "Yes, I dismissed you. Yes, I made you feel like you were the problem." I held his gaze. Yes, each word landed, not as punishment, but as truth, and he didn't look away. "I'm sorry," he said. This time the words carried weight, not just emotion, understanding. I let the silence sit for a moment. "Then I believe you," I said. He exhaled, not in relief, but in acknowledgement. Because belief doesn't erase what happened. It just opens the door to something else. "What happens now?" he asked. I considered that, carefully. Now I said we rebuild. He nodded slowly. "From where?" he asked. "From truth," I replied. "Not from comfort, not from habit. From truth. Because anything else would just break again." Over the next few weeks, things changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily. Ethan continued therapy. He checked in not out of obligation, but intention. Our conversations were different now, less polished, less easy, but more honest. And that honesty began to fill the space that had once been occupied by illusion. I also made changes, not because I had to, but because I chose to. I reviewed my estate, not with fear, not with defensiveness, but with clarity. Michael had always believed that what we built should mean something beyond us, and now I understood that more than ever. I established a foundation, focused on supporting widowed women, women who, like me, had spent years building something only to find themselves alone, vulnerable, and often underestimated. I restructured my assets, not around assumptions of family, but around values, accountability, purpose, because legacy isn't about who inherits, it's about what endures. One afternoon, Ethan stood beside me in the garden. We hadn't said much. We didn't need to. The air was calm, the world steady again. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were," he said. I nodded. "They won't," I replied. He looked at me. "And that's okay," he said. I allowed myself a small smile. "Yes," I said, "it is, because sometimes what breaks doesn't need to be restored. It needs to be rebuilt, stronger, clearer, truer. And for the first time since all of this began, I believed we were finally on that path." The morning Ethan came back not as my son who needed something, but as a man who understood what he had done, felt different from any morning I had known in years. There was no tension in the air, no quiet anticipation, no waiting for something to go wrong, just stillness, the kind that comes after a storm has already passed. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock, soft, measured, not hesitant this time, intentional. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, not guarded, not defensive, not searching for the right words, just present. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi," I replied. We didn't rush into conversation. We didn't pretend everything was fine. We just stood there for a moment, letting the truth of where we were settle between us. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked inside, slowly glancing around, not as someone evaluating, not as someone expecting, but as someone remembering. This house had held every version of his life, and now it was holding this one too. We sat in the living room again. Same space, different people. "I've been thinking about something you said," he began. I didn't interrupt. "That I need to decide what kind of man I want to be," he continued. I nodded once, and I asked. He exhaled slowly. "I thought that was something you figure out," once he said, like, "you reach a point and that's who you are." He shook his head slightly. "But it's not," he added. "It's something you choose, over and over again." I watched him carefully, because this was new. "Yes," I said, "it is." He looked at me. "And I chose wrong," he said. The honesty in that sentence didn't hurt. It grounded, because it meant he understood. "Yes," I said again. He didn't flinch, didn't defend, he just accepted it. "I wanted something so badly," he continued. "A future, a family, something that felt stable." His voice softened. "I didn't realize I was building that on something that wasn't real." I leaned back slightly. "That happens more often than people admit," I said. He gave a small, quiet smile. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it does." We sat in silence for a moment. Not empty, just reflective. Then he spoke again. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. I looked at him. "Why not?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because I didn't just make a mistake," he said. "I ignored you. I dismissed you. I chose not to see what was right in front of me." I held his gaze. "That's true," I said. He nodded. "I need to live with that," he said. "Yes," I replied. Another pause. "Then, but I'd like the chance to do better," he added. There it was. Not a request for comfort, not a demand for reconciliation, just a willingness to try. I considered that, not quickly, not emotionally, but honestly. "Doing better isn't something you say," I said. I know, he replied. "It's something you prove," I continued. "I understand." I studied him for a moment longer. Then I nodded. "All right," I said. The word was simple, but it opened something, not everything, not all at once, but enough. He exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said. I didn't respond to that, because gratitude wasn't the point. Growth was. Over the next few months, we didn't return to who we had been. We built something new, something quieter, more intentional. Our conversations were no longer easy in the way they once were. They were honest. And honesty takes effort, but it also creates something stronger. Ethan continued therapy. He spoke about things he had never spoken about before: his fear of disappointing me, his need to feel successful in his own way, his discomfort with conflict, things that had made him vulnerable, not weak, just human. And as he understood those things better, he began to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but consistently. And consistency is what truth looks like over time. I changed too, not because I'd been wrong, but because I had been hurt. And healing requires movement. I spent more time on the foundation, working with women who had experienced loss, betrayal, and the quiet kind of dismissal that often follows both. I listened to their stories, their fears, their strength, and in doing so, I found something I hadn't expected: peace. Not because everything had been resolved, but because I understood something clearly now. Strength isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to let go. One afternoon, Ethan joined me at the foundation office, not as a visitor, not as someone observing, but as someone asking how he could help. "I don't know much about this world," he admitted. "You don't need to," I said. "You just need to listen." So he did. And for the first time, I saw him not as the boy I had raised, but as the man he was becoming. And that mattered more than anything else. Months later, we stood together at the lake house, the same place Chloe had once tried to claim, the same place that had become a symbol of everything that had nearly been taken. Now, it was just a place again, quiet, calm, ours. Ethan looked out over the water. "I almost lost this," he said. I stepped beside him. "No," I replied. "You almost misunderstood it." He glanced at me. "What do you mean? This was never about the house," I said, "or the money." He frowned slightly. "Then what was it about?" I looked out at the water. "It was about truth," I said. He was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "Yeah," he said softly, "I see that now." And I believed him, because this time, he wasn't saying it to be right. He was saying it because he understood. As the sun began to set, casting soft light across the lake, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief, not triumph, something deeper, completion. Not of the story, but of the lesson. Because in the end, this was never about exposing Chloe. It was about protecting something far more important: my judgment, my boundaries, my right to trust myself. And in doing that, I didn't just save what Michael and I had built. I reclaimed who I was. After everything I've lived through, there's one truth I carry with me more than any other. When something feels wrong, especially for women who have spent decades caring for others, we are often taught to ignore that voice inside us. To be polite, to be patient, to give people the benefit of the doubt. But sometimes, that voice is the only thing standing between us and being quietly taken advantage of. Loneliness can make us vulnerable. Love can make us overlook what we would normally question. And hope can make us believe in things that aren't real. But truth has a weight to it. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to convince. It simply stands. And if we're willing to stand with it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs us something, we protect more than just our money or our homes. We protect our dignity, our clarity, our self-worth. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. It is self-respect. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to participate in a lie. Healing doesn't come from pretending nothing happened. It comes from facing what did and choosing every day to move forward with honesty. So I'd like to ask you, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have confronted Chloe sooner or waited like I did? And do you think Ethan deserved a second chance? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love reading your stories and connecting with you. If this story stayed with you even just a little, consider liking and subscribing, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us we're not alone.